Hachakaro Nina Hina Kagari Hapije Rajaska Ho-Chunk Ska Ga Hingaeda. Hanichari Haipin. Did anybody understand what I just said?
No. No.
Okay, what I said was, hello, my friends, I greet you. My name is Ho-Chunk Ska Ga, and I'm glad to be here. So I spoke that in the Ho-Chunk language, would have been the language that was spoken in this area right around 600 years ago. So our traditional territory ran from where Nicolay met us at what's called Red Banks, but it's Green Bay, Wisconsin. Runs all the way down to Chicago, down to Des Plaines River, down to the Illinois River, down to the Mississippi, back up through Iowa into Minnesota, and then back over to Green Bay. We had quite a big tribal area. We had settlements all over the place. Oops, I don't know how that got in there.
It's a good picture.
Yeah, I'm a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation. We're out of Wisconsin. The Ho-Chunk Nation is federally recognized tribe. We got recognized in 1982. And we changed the name from Winnebago to Ho-Chunk. The reason why we changed the name is when, and if you're from Wisconsin, I'm gonna butcher this on purpose. When Nicollet come across the Great Lakes, they yelled at me a couple times in Wisconsin, it's Nicolay. When Nicollet come across the Great Lakes, he had Algonquin guides. And then he had Jesuit priests with him. They met the Ho-Chunk people at Red Banks, Green Bay, and they embedded themselves with the Ho-Chunk people. Well, the Algonquin guides said there must have been an algae bloom going on at the time when they first met. If you know what an algae bloom smells like, it doesn't smell real good. So Winnebago, spelled with a Q, Winnebago, means people of the stinky water.
Yeah.
And we're not the people of the stinky water, we're people of the big voice or the people of the sacred voice. So that's what Ho-Chunk means. The archaeologist and anthropologist in Wisconsin have, let's see, how do I say that? The archaeologists and anthropologists from Wisconsin have dated us back to 7,000 BC. Because we came from the driftless region in Wisconsin. If you don't know what the driftless region is, it's the area where the glaciers did not come through. So there was plenty of game and stuff like that in that area. So I'm going to start my program off about who I am and why I am. And my tale starts with my grandfather, Chief Walks with the Wind, Sam Sign. And this is an old story. So he was my grandfather. I don't have a lot of pictures of him when he was young. Here's a picture, his baby picture. He was born in Winnebago, Nebraska on the reservation. So, and this was that book I was telling you about. So, that family actually walked all the way back from Winnebago, Nebraska, all the way to Wisconsin. So this was back in the early 1900s. My grandmother, Ruth Mallory, pay attention to this dress, because we're going to see it quite a few more times. This is my grandmother when she was younger. My grandfather and his family, my grandfather's family came from the north end of the Wisconsin Rapids area, and my grandmother's family was down along the river here. She talked about her father being a good provider, and they lived right by the river, and he would fish, hunt, trap, and he was just a general good provider, not having to work in town. So they stayed hidden deep in the woods. Well, this is my grandmother's family, and this is my grandmother here. As the kids got a little older, there was a need for Fred Mallory, my great-grandfather, to get a job because he had to provide more for the kids. So he got a job in the cranberry marshes. And word got back that he had a family deep in the woods. So the next thing you know, At that time, the federal government was rounding up all kids and sending them to residential school. So they said the boys always ran, so they had the handcuffs and they would handcuff them into the wagon. And then they paid the local sheriff a $10 bounty for all the kids that did run away that he caught and took to the residential school. The residential school that they went to is a Wisconsin Indian Mission School, Neillsville, Wisconsin. When they took the kids, my grandmother talked about, you don't see a lot of smiling faces in here. If they were alive, she would tell me which one she was, because this was when they were there. This is where my grandparents actually met, was in the residential school. You can imagine not being able to speak your native language. You have to learn English, and then you're forced into a different religion. So they had to learn a different religion. And then they were punished if they got caught speaking native language. My grandmother talks about when she first got there, she only talked about it once, but how they put the lice powder on, stripped her naked, put the lice powder on her, and then cut her hair to shoulder length. And then they always had to wear dresses. Then the boys had all their hair cut off. You don't see a lot of smiling faces in this picture. So my uncle, like I say, that one book that I referenced, he talks about how one of the girls escaped the residential school. And they caught her and brought her back and made an example out of her. And they beat her in front of all of the kids in the school. And she fell down and hit a cement sidewalk. And she died from that. So it was a very brutal upbringing. My uncle also talked about smelling the people's breath. There was so many kids in this building that you could smell the people's breath at night when you were in the bunk. So tuberculosis went through the residential schools like you wouldn't believe. And they had a separate place they put them, and not quite a few didn't make it. My grandparents, after they got out of residential school, they joined a Wild West show. Not this particular one, but a Wild West show, and they toured the United States. They toured the United States, and they met a very charismatic gentleman who had asked my grandfather if he would be interested in moving back to Illinois, since it had been over a century since there had been Native Americans in Illinois. And my grandfather said, "I'd like to see what you're talking about." Here's a picture of my grandfather and his family at the time. This is Junior. Junior passed away. He had an appendicitis attack, and he was not admitted to the hospital because they knew my grandparents couldn't pay. And plus he was dark skinned. So finally the local ministers said his church would pay for it, but it was too late. He died of sepsis. So, but this was an old picture of my grandparents' family. Well, this is when they were doing the touring. Like I say, notice the dress again. At the time, the property that this charismatic man was talking about was the Starved Rock Lodge. It was being built by the CCC. Starved Rock Lodge is right here. Remember this circular drive, we're going to talk about it. And where my grandfather actually moved into Starved Rock, he moved into right about here. Because this road comes and winds right over here, and he was right here. You can still see the driveway. They still have posts where his driveway used to be. So he lived in the park from 1935 to 1965 until they kicked him out of the park because he wasn't paying taxes. So one hand giveth, the other hand taketh. The very charismatic man that relocated my grandfather into Starved Rock was Governor Henry Horner. So this is gone. This is the old Starved Rock Hotel. If you ever listen to Fibber McGee and Molly, he used to reference going to the Starved Rock Hotel quite a bit because the steamboat would dock right there. So it's kind of a neat thing. I'm showing my age here because I listen to that stuff and I like it. So This is all gone. The visitor center is right here now. This here actually just turns and goes out now. So this area here, we're gonna talk about in a little bit. And like I say, remember that this here is Circular Drive. Starved Rock is here, Lover's Leap is over here. And right here, if you get to watch any Christmas shows with your grandkids or nieces or nephews, watch the movie Prancer. The last part of that movie was shot right here. At the end of the movie, Prancer learns how to fly. And he jumped off of Devil's Nose right here. So it's kind of an interesting tidbit. I thought it was kind of neat to add in there. So, but yeah, the CCC built this all out. And we'll talk about more about the lodge in a little bit here. My grandfather got the job as the doorman at Starved Rock Lodge. And he sold postcards in the lodge and had programs about once a month in the lodge. He would do Native American programs for the guests, and the lodge would pay him to do that. So we're gonna jump up to 1962. This is Chief Floyd White Eagle. He was the traditional chief of the Ho-Chunk people back then. So this is a good looking guy right here. That was actually me. And then my grandfather, Chief Walks with the Wind. So the naming ceremonies go very similar to what you have heard. Young lady, are you a student?
Yeah.
I've got something for you then. This goes with the last tale of the evening. So, it's a souvenir for you. Come on up here, I got this. And then you'll see something special about it. And we'll talk about it, and it'll actually be in the slideshow. So it's the end you have to look at.
He's bribing you to.
So the naming ceremonies are much like you have heard. The naming ceremonies, the elder would pray to the creator Mauna for a name to be given for whoever they're naming at the time. So, and that's how our naming ceremonies went. So Chief White Eagle was looking at the family here. My dad worked inside, my mom worked inside. She could have actually given Michael Jackson a few tips on skin bleaching. And then my uncle, he worked inside at Commonwealth Edison. Then there was me and my grandfather. We were the two dark ones in the picture there. Well, Chief Floyd White Eagle seen all the white skin, and he decided to call me White Winnebago. That was my native name, Ho-Chunk Ska Ga. So we changed. I was named before the tribe changed the name. So we changed the official name in '82. So I was named before that. So I was the Winnebago. The Winnebago people on the reservation have not changed their name yet, but it's going to happen when the history finally gets back to them, what it actually means. Some of the elders will get together and say it's probably time that we change it. So, well, like I say, we're going to reference my uncle here. And now let me tell you, humor is very big with the native people. So I'll just set that, because he got a zinger on me. We'll talk about that a little bit, but that's my uncle there. He actually moved in with my grandparents when he was 12 years old. He wanted to be a native, he wanted to be an American Indian, and he came and asked my grandparents if he could move in with them, and it was fine with his parents. And he actually moved in and became part of the family. So he was adopted in. He kind of took the place of Junior that passed away. So it was a big day that day. My one uncle, he worked for Foot Cone and Belding in Chicago. It was a national advertising firm, and he did the national advertising for this naming ceremony for me back in 1962. That day, if you look at this picture, they said 26 different tribes were represented that day. You see all the chiefs sitting here, and you see all these people. You see the canvas palisades that were put up. My grandfather, as you know, you can't charge admission for anything in the state park. but my grandfather was pretty resourceful. He laid a blanket down and he told everybody coming in and going, please be generous, leave a 5 or a 50 on the blanket. This was back in 1962, so $5 was a pretty good chunk of change back then. 50 was even more outrageous, so leave a 5 or a 50. So it was said that 40,000 people came to Starved Rock that day, and people parked 4 miles outside of Starved Rock for the naming ceremony. So it was a big deal. You can see all the people that were here. This was in the early beginning, so it was a huge day. We're gonna jump back about 5 years from this point right now. We had a naming ceremony for my niece. My sister passed away at the beginning of COVID, and one of her last wishes was that her daughter get a name. And me and my brother set forth, we got hold of all the right people. I even made a list of all of the names of the women to give to him, thinking that maybe he would pass the name down. So if you look at, it was standing room only that day because it was well advertised also. And we had it inside Starved Rock. I'm back here, my son is right there. We have another chief that's here. So it was a big day that day. This is my niece right here. Remember the dress? It got handed down, handed down, handed down. So this is Cleland Goodbear. He's a Vietnam veteran. And he's the elder in the Bear clan who got to name my niece. And he only got to meet her for a half hour. He went outside and prayed for a name. And he gave her the name Wowa Piwinga, which means good thinker. I go, wasn't any of the names I gave him. And wow, I couldn't have thought of a better name to give her because she is the nighttime troubleshooter for Intel Corporation. So I'm sure that must have come up in the conversation. That's why she got that name. So it was a very solemn thing that at that naming ceremony. So this was at the naming ceremony. This gentleman here, you're going to see in a few more pictures. We used to do a yearly tribute to my grandfather at the Starved Rock Lodge, tribute to Chief Walks with the Wind. And that gentleman came up and he said when he got back from Vietnam, he did not know who he was. He left as a very young man who kind of went with everything, and he come back very confused about his role in humanity. And he stayed with my grandfather for 3 months. He was relaying all this, and as he's doing this, he shed a few tears. He goes, he taught me how to become a real human being. He taught me who I really was. He goes, I prayed that I was forgiven for everything that I had done, and it was granted. He goes, I still have to live with that. And like I say, he had us all crying because it was such an emotional outpouring that he did. It was really interesting thing. I had a few tears coming down because we would take people in all the time. My grandfather would rebuild people. So that was a common thing. Well, here's the other chief that was here besides myself. We had a very good day that day. He got to speak that day too. We had a drum. We had a very, like I say, it was standing room only for that naming ceremony for my niece. So you can see all the logs inside here from the original Starved Rock Lodge from the CCC and the fireplace that was built by a different group of CCC. So that's in a different program. I taught Starved Rock history. I go more into depth onto the CCC. At this point, I always ask, are there any veterans in the group here? Okay. All of our native ceremonies, and this would have been a native ceremony that we do, we always honor our veterans. The first song that we play, we bring in the colors. So this is the Native American flag here. It's an eagle feather staff. And then if we had a bigger gathering, we would bring in the US colors. and then the different military groups that they represent. After that song, after we post the colors, the second song that we sing is a veteran song. And we encourage all the veterans to get out and dance. So my niece or my cousin, who wasn't brought up in the native way, she was a lifer in the Navy. She's a college professor now. I had to tell her, this song is for you, whether you know it or not. Get out there and dance. She goes, I don't know how to dance. I go, you just walk around. I go, honor your ancestors, honor yourself, honor your fellow veterans. You know, that's what this song is about. We even tell people in the crowd, if you're a veteran, please come out and dance. You don't have to dance, you just walk around and be honored that way. So that's always the second song that we do. So they're very solemn ceremonies that we have. You see over here, I was giving my niece a blessing. Like I say, you see the picture of the gentleman there again. So the last time there was a naming ceremony at the Starved Rock Lodge was way back in 1948. So there was a 60-year span or 70-year span since the naming ceremony happened. So you look here, there's my Aunt Aurelia, Weeha, as we call her, my grandmother, my grandfather, and then some of the her brother here. You see the other chiefs that were here, and the guy that looks like Bob Hope, he was the manager at the lodge at the time. And you're a little too young for Bob Hope, but look it up. You'll get a kick out of that because he looks just like Bob Hope. We lent him a bonnet to wear for the day because he let us use the lodge, and he provided the meal and gave rooms to some of the people also. So it was a very big day that stuff happened. Back in 1820s, the Illinois militia was tasked with removing Native Americans because of the treaties. This treaty map here is Illinois Land Cessation Treaties, and it's one of the maps that they use. Illinois 1 talks, each different color talks about a different treaty that they had. So back then, this was originally Ho-Chunk territory, and you'll see how it gets cut down. But this primarily was what the Illinois militia was tasked into doing right here. In order to be in the Illinois militia, you were a volunteer. You were given a shirt, you were given a hat, and you were given a musket. Remember, you're a volunteer. My grandfather said that a lot of the settlements happened because after they would round up the natives to move them into Missouri, Kansas, and Iowa, into the Louisiana Purchase, they were going to be moved into there. The Illinois militia would round them up, and then the natives would disappear back into the woods at night. Just think, if you were part of the Illinois militia, a volunteer, would you follow natives back into their home area at night? You know, as a volunteer? Probably not. He said that's how a lot of the settlements actually got that happened, because they went deep into the woods not to be found again. So the next one here is Illinois 2, and it deals with northern Illinois here. And you see a lot of the different, they gave this area to the Potawatomi, this area, and then the Ho-Chunk area is real small. Like I remember I was talking about earlier, how they pushed their way through. Well, they pushed us back over here. The Menominee, the Ojibwe, they were back in this area originally. Chicago was traded so many different times by different tribes that one of the people from the DuSable Museum was asking me about the first natives that were in the area. I go, you gotta tell me what the time that you're talking about, because Chicago was traded so many different times, you know. And so you can't just say it was the Potawatomi, you know. A lot of the paper experts, that's all they know is Potawatomi, because that's what was written down, you know. So they're thinking Potawatomi were the people. Well, they don't they don't look back and they don't listen to the oral history that's passed down. So, but the line here, this was Indian they called it Indian territory if you went to the north side of that. So, and I think that was actually Lake Cook Road. So way back when. So, but this was all treaties to remove the natives out of Illinois. And this was in the 1830s. Black Hawk kind of spurned this here. And then actually at the same time of Black Hawk's uprising, we had the uprising. It's called the Indian Creek Massacre. Whenever we did something, it was called a massacre. Well, what happened was right north of Ottawa, there's a creek there. And there was a Potawatomi tribe or settlement that was there, and they would wait for the fish to migrate up the creek. While they were waiting, the fish weren't coming. So the tribal elder sent his son down the creek to find out why the fish weren't migrating up. Well, a settler went ahead and put a dam on that creek and put a flour mill in there. So the young native boy, he started tearing the dam down. Well, the settlers seen him tearing that down and almost beat the young native to death. He went back to his family's dwellings not too far away. And they came back and they killed all the settlers and kidnapped 2 of the young girls. The Ho-Chunk people were the ones that negotiated the return of the young girls. So we were the guides for Black Hawk. We gave him a better path up and through Wisconsin. And we were the guides for the US military at the time too.
Jeez.
And we took them through the swamps. So, you know, they didn't catch on right away, but some of the other higher ups caught on and said, how come we're not making headway? You know, that's because we're taking them through the swamps and the wheels would cut through the ground and get buried in the ground. So I'm gonna go back to my tribe, the Ho-Chunk, and we'll talk about land cessations. 1829, like I say, that part of that map was right there. You see the Ho-Chunk villages all around here. Right up here is South Beloit. We had a nice big village there, Rockford. We go down here to Rock Falls, Dixon area. Further down, you know, we had settlements all over the place. So 1829, this was ceded. 1832, this was ceded. 1837, this was ceded. And they moved us to what was called neutral ground. So it's right here. We go to neutral ground. So there's a span of, it's about 13 years in actuality, that we were on neutral ground in Iowa. We were removed there. Well, they were all given 1 day's notice to pack everything they had, and they were going to get moved again because the settlers found out this was actually pretty good land to farm. And we had farmed that land and we were very successful at farming that land. So they went ahead and they moved us up to here, to the Long Prairie Reservation. The Long Prairie Reservation was heavily wooded. And we were not lumberjack people, we were farmers. We were fishermen, we were hunters and trappers. So we weren't used to a heavily wooded area. And we complained about it and we got moved. We got moved down to the Blue Earth Reservation, where Mankato, Minnesota is. There's a book out, Banished Forever by Kathy Coates, that talks about being on the reservation there, that they formed a hate group against the Ho-Chunk people. It was called Knights of the Forest. Some very influential people were part of that hate group and lobbied, because you'll never guess, that land was good land too. And the Ho-Chunk people were very successful at farming it. And then, like say, that hate group would come riding through and they wore masks just like the KKK would, so they couldn't identify them. So what my uncle wrote in the book, Every Warrior Has a Song, they would tie a rope across the path and trip the horses. And then they would go into town the next day to find out who was roughed up. And they could identify who the racists were. So it was alleged that one of the bank presidents was one of them. There was all kinds of influential people. Well, they lobbied the US government to get us moved. And then we got moved over to the Crow Creek Reserve. The Crow Creek Reserve was an area where the Sioux were fighting the Cheyenne. So they figured if we moved them in between there, we would just get killed off. Well, we complained about that. We got moved again down to the Winnebago, Nebraska reservation. If you notice anything about this picture, you notice settlements get smaller and smaller and smaller. So kind of an interesting thing about the Winnebago reservation. I'm a beekeeper. I was sending some honey out to my aunt. And one of my relatives in Chicago said, here, send some honey to my sister. So I go ahead and I get this all priority mail. I go to the post office with the address, Winnebago, Nebraska, the street and all of that house. And the girl behind the counter goes, we don't show that address. I go, is that because it's on the reservation? She goes, oh, if it's on the reservation, it goes general delivery. So she does not get to vote yet, still today, because she doesn't have an address that is recognized by the federal government. She has to go to the tribal office to vote. She's 90 years old and doesn't drive, and the tribal office is 40 miles away. So chances are she probably doesn't vote. You look at the name here, Teddy Roosevelt. The only good Indians are dead Indians. He had another quote too. He said that 9 out of 10 Indians are bad, and he's not so sure about the 10th. So that is still kind of the attitude that the Bureau of Indian Affairs has towards Native Americans. I was in Southern Illinois last year speaking, and I was taken on the Trail of Tears that went through Illinois. It was quite the education. The professor that took me along here talked about the one ferry that come across the Ohio River. And this is where a lot of the people, a lot of the Cherokee people were unloaded there. And he talked up, we went this whole trail, and right in the middle there's a valley. He goes, it's about 6 degrees colder than any place else. And when this happened, it was in January when they marched them through there. And that 6 degree colder difference, you're talking to people from down south here, up in Illinois, 6 degree temperature difference caused a lot of the deaths because it was so cold. And some of the pictures they show that the snow was up about their knees that they had to march through on this Trail of Tears. So on this side here, he said there was 2 ferry boats that they would take, and that's why there's 2 paths here. So he talked about all of that, and currently today, all of these nations are still represented in Oklahoma. So it's kind of an interesting tidbit. I thought I'd throw that in there because I learned it all last year. So it was really interesting. I didn't know anything about the Trail of Tears because everything for me is from north here. So this was sent to me by a newspaper person, and that's why I went ahead and highlighted the article here. $50 bounty in 1814 for a Native American scalp. Man, woman, or child that goes into an American settlement. The rest of the article talks about they had to have murderous intent. Well, if you're going to take my scalp, I'm probably going to have murderous intent. So that was an easy $50 back in 1814, a lot of money. The original Illinois territory was quite big. Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota. That was the original Illinois territory. And then Wisconsin got recognized for its territory. Actually, this all became the Michigan territory before Wisconsin was recognized. So the Illinois territory, though, back when the volunteer militia was doing things, that's what they had. In the 1830s, it was the federal government militia was the one that removed all the natives into the different areas, the neutral ground, all the different places where they were moved to. So that was done by the federal government. It was said, if you lag behind, they let you lag behind, and they would send 2 soldiers back to dispatch you. So that didn't float very well with a lot of the tribal members. So there was intentional uprisings. So this one I do for the schools. This is the same program I do for a lot of schools. My ethnicity is not a costume, and my identity is not a costume to wear. When I was in some of the schools before Halloween, I told them, I go, whatever you do, do not dress up as a Native American. It is very offensive to a lot of the natives. Everything that I have on has meaning on it. So, and I'll talk about that right now. If you notice, go to the next slide. I've got a buckskin shirt on. I've got trade beads on it. I'm a member of the Bear Clan, so I have a bear claw necklace on. I'm a Bear Clan chief. I have a chief insignia star with porcupine quill and trade beads my grandmother made. And if you notice, I wear a bone choker and a bone breastplate. You'll see a lot of the natives wear these. The reason for it was this was old time bulletproof vest. So back in the day, there used to be woodland buffalo in this area. There was elk, there was deer, there was all kinds of different animals that we would hunt. And if we took one of them down with a bow and arrow, somebody had to go see if it was dead. And you didn't want to get horned. Here, this would stop the horn. So this would keep you from being disemboweled. And then if you got hit in the neck, it would stop you from bleeding out. So that's what the old traditional meeting is, with all of the bone things like that. So it's kind of a piece of history that's kind of left out. Nobody talks about it. I've got what my grandfather would call the original name is moccasins. So that's what you guys call them. So moccasins. So that's what I have on. I got this pair here that I had on there, I had since I was 16. So a lot of our stuff is handed down and used over and over and over again. I still have them. They're down in my basement. So.
Nice, they're just as comfortable.
Oh, very. The bottoms of these are made with elk hide.
Oh. So
they're a lot thicker, so you don't feel the rocks. I'm a tenderfoot at heart. So if you've ever stepped on a rock in bare feet, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
We come from a matriarchal society, meaning the women had a lot of decision power. So my grandmother would have been a clan mother, and in the matriarchal society, the women would have they would decide whether we went to war or not, because they had so much to lose with their young men. So they would get together and they would decide if we were going to go to war against anybody. Remember, we're primarily fisher, huntermen, farmers. So that's pretty much how we were. We were very peaceful people. Most of the original native Illinois tribes were very peaceful people. So back to 1985, my grandfather, Sam Sign, Chief Walks with the Wind, passed away. And at his funeral, my grandmother asked me if I would like to have his bonnet. And I go, Grandma, he earned that bonnet. He gets buried with that bonnet. I didn't realize how wise I was at the time, and I didn't realize that we were a matriarchal society, where the next chief is the oldest daughter's first boy, which is actually me. So I didn't realize it back when I was 24 years old, and it was probably a good thing, because I had a lot of wild oats to sow yet. So a young man, well, my uncle, about 5 years ago, he goes, I need 5 minutes, because we did the annual program, the tribute to my grandfather. I need 5 minutes. I go, you're my uncle, you got all the time you want. And he gets the microphone and he's talking, and he talks about my grandfather. And this is the fur turban is what a woodland chief would wear. The feather bonnet is kind of an honorary thing now. We're kind of both plains and woodland because of the Winnebago reservation. He gave me my bonnet. My grandmother had this made for me. That set the wheels in motion when I said no to my grandfather's bonnet. So she had a bonnet made for me. And if you notice, these are golden eagle feathers, not the bald eagle feathers. And I didn't know until this last year that there was a difference. He goes, one of the elders told me, he goes, "Well, I seen your picture." He goes, "Your bonnet, it's golden eagle. Those are more sacred. You got a more sacred bonnet. So you must have did something good." So I'm just being responsible, because after my grandfather passed away, I looked after my grandmother. I provided food if she needed it, did maintenance and everything like that. Just kind of looked after her and make sure that everything was good. So that was the responsibility I took on. When I got this bonnet, it comes with immense responsibility also, because I have to look after all of my relatives now. And even if they're not my relatives, if you're my neighbor, I still keep an eye and make sure you're okay, because the neighbor woman across the street, she lost her husband a couple years ago, and her yard was full of leaves, so I ran over there and picked up all her leaves the other day. So she brought me a coffee card though. Yeah, I'm a coffeeholic. That's about all I am anymore. So my uncle, he gives me the bonnet, and he goes, he starts speaking, and he goes, he remembered me talking about the naming ceremony that we had back and that circular drive down in Star Rock. And he goes, "That isn't quite the way I remembered that your naming. It's not quite how I remember it going." He goes, "I was talking with Chief White Eagle before the naming, and he was telling me that he was gonna go do some traveling across the US. And he decided that he thought maybe he would buy a new RV and travel the US. Well, lo and behold, what happens at the time of your naming was a brand new white Winnebago went around that circular drive, and that's how you got the name White Winnebago." Yeah, that was a good zinger. He got me there. I explained earlier how I got my name, that all of my relatives all had white skin, and the traditional chief seen that and he named me White Winnebago. So it was but that was a very special day for me that day to get this bonnet. So I do a lot of different things with my tribal youth and elders too. I try to teach them who they are and why they are, and the struggles that our people went through to be here yet today. So a lot of our youth don't understand any of that. So we have different manhood rights for different tribes. The picture here off to the left is Cherokee manhood rights. When you're 10 years old, they would blindfold you and take you out in the woods and send you into the woods. You can imagine all the noises that you hear when you're 10 years old. The picture over here is of the Sioux Nation. They would take a deer antler, tie themselves, and hang from a tree. And they would look for a vision. If you didn't have a name, they would give you a name afterwards. And that was their manhood rite of passage. In my tribe, what we did, at 13 years old, you take what you could carry, go into the woods for a week. Well, at 13 years old, you're not the best planner, but I thought I was pretty well ready. I had my 2 cans of Dinny Moore beef stew, and I was an accomplished camper. I was a hunter, trapper, fisherman. I thought I was set. I had a little backpack. Well, you remember your first night in boot camp?
I was Air Force Academy.
Okay, well, still, the first night when you're away and your safety net is gone, you do a lot of growing up that first night. Every noise in the woods around you, you think it's something. Even though you're the biggest, baddest thing in the woods, at 13 years old, you do a little growing up. You do a little crying because your safety net's not there anymore. So that was a thing that within our tribe, how you become, that's a manhood, right? You become a young man then. Well, after about the second day, not being a great planner, I forgot water. So I had hunted this land. It was about a 2,000 acre piece of property I was on. I knew where the swamp was, and then it fed into a creek or a pond. So I went down there and I figured I found the source. I found the source, the spring. So again, not the best planner. I didn't bring a water vessel to capture the water. I knew that it was railroad tracks about 2 miles down. I went down to the railroad tracks because I know how white people like to throw garbage off the train. So I went ahead and walked the tracks, and guess what I found? Luckily, my picture wasn't on the side. Back in the days, they used to have pictures of missing kids on the paper milk cartons. So I found one of these milk cartons and I filled it with water, and then I took it up and boiled it. So I had water. So that was one of our manhood rights that we did when we got 13 years old. I talk about water because the people who've never been without water, they always complain about the taste of water. Water is one of the most important things in our life. We are all born of clean water. If you don't believe it, ask your mother. Your mother will tell you, that's how important clean water is. We're all born of clean water. It's so important to have clean water. The Dakota Access Pipeline uprising that we had, they were going to run the pipeline through the city. And the white people said, we don't want that in our city, because if it breaks, it'll contaminate our water. Run it through the Indian reservation. So they ran it through the Indian reservation. All the tribes protested that. And this is the first time that they used military style weapons against peaceful people here in the United States. So I was on the protest where it crossed the Mississippi River from Illinois, from Iowa into Illinois. So I was on the protest line there, because that oil, if it ever gets into anything, will contaminate the water for generations. Right now, there's another thing going on right now. They want to put an oil pipeline across the Mackinac Bridge. And they say if that pipeline breaks, it will contaminate all of the Great Lakes. And that's our biggest freshwater drinking basin.
Yeah.
So it's something to think about. That's going on right now. All of the local people up there are completely against it. So, and it's not oil from the US, it's oil from Canada. So they've got their own access they could take it to. So it's a very important thing, water is. This next one's for my student here. How long do you think it takes for this to biodegrade? Doesn't matter, just say anything. Okay, I'm glad you said that. It takes a little longer than that. 1,000 years for this to biodegrade. How do you think it tastes? Not too good. It's made out of oil. So they make benches out of this for the colleges. They make roads with it in different countries. So that's why it's so important to recycle. This is my environmental speech for my young people, and even the older people. Don't be afraid to pick something up. And if you look on the floor of my truck, I got my empties I throw down there and I put them in the recycle bin. So, like I had mentioned before, my people were primarily farmers, fishermen, hunters, trappers. We practice what's called Three Sisters planting. We would plant the native corn. We would plant the beans next to it. The beans would run up the corn and put nitrogen back in the soil. And then we would plant squash around that. All three of these items could be dried and stored for further use in the different seasons. So in the wintertime, you would have all of these things that were dried and saved. The native corn is actually healthier for you than the GMO corn that we have today. If you notice anything about the corn that we have today, it does not digest. It flows through you. The native corn doesn't have sugars, and it's healthier for you. It takes longer to prepare. Many of you have seen it on the doors of some people, where they tie it and hang it on the front door, the native corn. So that's the corn that's actually good for you. You soak it in baking soda for about 4 hours to soften the hull. And then you cook it. Takes about a day to cook it too, because I cook it in a bone broth with buffalo meat. And that's good stuff there. So it's actually healthy for you. So we were fishermen. We had two different styles of canoes. We had the birch bark canoe. You can peel the birch bark off of the tree and not kill the tree because it will grow back. So, and then you use the resin to glue it together to make it waterproof. Or you make a dugout canoe. Either way, you could do either one. Dugout canoes are probably the most popular. All of the waterways that are around here, especially this Fox River, it was a super highway for Native Americans. So they would come down with their canoes. And then eventually the French come down and we were trade partners with the French. We created fish traps. Like I say, we did all kinds of different things. Hunting. If you look at my shirt here, it's buckskin. My moccasins, buckskin. Elk on the bottom. So, believe it or not, the woodland buffalo used to be in this area. They were a little smaller than the prairie buffalo. I don't know if you guys remember about a year ago in the news, Tyson, the bison,
Yeah.
got loose and it evaded capture for almost a whole year. You know, they hide in the woods pretty good. So they used helicopter and everything to try to move that buffalo, and it just stayed put. It knew how to hide. The woodland buffalo, there's a little smaller, like I say, than the plains buffalo. And these were what they told me in the 1820s is when they extincted the woodland buffalo. They had a big buffalo drive and they created a slaughterhouse in southern Illinois. And they said they slaughtered over 22,000 of the woodland buffalo, the last of the woodland buffalo. They tell me today that they're trying to recreate the woodland buffalo from some of the DNA that's left. So maybe it'll make a resurgence. Probably not my lifetime, but we'll talk about tribal names, common names. I am known as Kunu Savage. I'm the firstborn boy. The second boy would be Hena. Third boy, Haga. Fourthborn, Nagi. And then fifthborn, Nagi Zunu. And the women have names too, the common names. My mom was a Hinu. My aunt, she was a Wiha. Thirdborn, Haksiga. Fourthborn, Haneke. And then Haksiga Zunu for fifthborn. Back then, they didn't have a lot of TVs, so families got quite large. Like I mentioned before, we're a matriarchal society. And I was at the casino one day for tribal business. I ran out to my car to get something. And as I'm going out, one of the grandmas, she's coming out to her car. She goes, "Who are you?" I go, "I'm Kunu Savage." And she goes, "Kunu, come over here and look at my car. I think this man hit my car." And I go, she's like 90 years old and she probably shouldn't be driving. But I went and looked at her car. And I looked at the other side and I go, "Gaga," that's grandma in Ho-Chunk. "Gaga, that's the way your car is made. Look at the other side too. It's exactly the same." And she thought the guy dented her car, but that the way the fascia was made on her car looked like a dent. So when grandma speaks, though, we listen. At one of the powwows about 20 years ago, I was at a powwow there, and one of the older women, she turned around and yelled, "Hey, Kunu," and about 50 heads turned. Because when grandma speaks, we all listen. So it's part of how we were all raised, all of the grandmas are sacred. So we take care of all of the grandmas. So that's just the way that we were brought up. I'll talk about this right now. Anybody know what this is called?
That peace pipe.
Okay, even my own people get it wrong. This is a prayer pipe. When the white man first met the natives, we would pray for peace. If you notice the color, it's red, and it's called the blood of Mother Earth. So it's there's a Pipestone National Park up in Minnesota where a lot of it's quarried, and you can carve it to whatever you want. Some of the pipes are effigy pipes, some are like this here. So this is a Starved Rock ceremonial pipe. I had a vision a while back to go quarry some pipestone in Pipestone, Minnesota. So I went ahead, I had to have our tribal IDs, I did some reading on it. I have to have sledgehammers, I have to have wedges. I had all of that. And we get all of this together. Me and my boy went. He was 17 years old at the time. He was a very good baseball player back then. And we went up to the Pipestone National Park. Only Native Americans are allowed to quarry the pipestone in Pipestone National Park. So I get up there, I talk to the superintendent of the park, and he said, "I need a copy of your tribal ID, which we gave him. And then he goes, "I'll send the maintenance guy out to pump out the pit." I go, "I never read anything about the pit having to be pumped out." Because I remember they were just quarries, what I read. And he goes, "No, we got pits. They're dugout pits." He goes, "And they hold water. There's about 3 foot of water in that. So I'm gonna have the maintenance guy go pump it out for you." Well, he goes ahead, sends the maintenance guy out, and he goes, "You guys are gonna be the only ones quarrying today. Whatever you do, don't give away any pipestone." Okay. So he goes, I'll call the park police up to take you out." And park policeman comes up, he comes inside there. I see he's got his golf cart out back, holds about 6 people. I got my buckets out there. We put the buckets on there. I do notice that he's got an M16 strapped to the A-pillar of the golf cart. And this young man had a desert camouflage bulletproof vest on, desert camouflage clothing on, military clothing, and he's got a sidearm on. And I see all of this and I wonder, as I would get back out to take our ride out to the pit, I go, "Is there something I should know? You seem awfully heavily armed, maybe there's a war going on that I didn't know about or didn't read about. I thought I was up on all the newspapers." And he goes, "No, I just got back from Afghanistan last week. I have not transitioned back into this world yet. This is what I feel safe with." So, and he was a policeman before he left to go to Afghanistan in park police. So he had his M16 with him. He goes, "This is what I feel safe with. Eventually I'll transition back and things will get a little looser." He goes, "But now it's just me. I have to have this stuff." And it really makes you think about the young people that come back, what they're bringing back with them. So it was kind of an eye opener both ways. I go, man, that guy, he was scared. Let's just say that, because he had to have the weapons there. Because he said they'd get shot at all the time, and he would have to, take action that way. So it was an interesting conversation. Well, we quarried for about 3 days, and then on that night, after the third day, it rained real bad. So we weren't gonna quarry in that pit because when we first got into that pit, there was about 4 inches of mud. So it was really muddy, a muddy mess. Well, the first day when we went quarrying, like I say, my boy was a good baseball player. On top, there's about probably a good foot of dirt. And then you go to quartzite. I read about that. And then the pipestone is down below that. So we get down into the pit. My boy grabs one of the sledgehammers and he just lets loose on that quartzite. He's thinking he's just gonna shatter it. I go, it was like watching somebody swing a sledgehammer and hitting an iron girder. He didn't even leave a pockmark on that quartzite. If you go to the railroad tracks and notice the purple stone that's out there, that's quartzite. That's one of the hardest stones out there. That's why the railroad uses it, because it's a good base. So that's a good strong base. Like I say, that night we got back to the motel. He fell face first onto his bed and I didn't wake him till the morning. He put quite the day in. I told him we had to look for a fissure, use a wedge. And we kind of gave up on that right away and went for the easy stuff that was out. So we went ahead and got some nice pieces. Well, that fourth day, we went to the National Pipe Museum. And it's a native run thing. And I had them check this pipe out. It's got a signature on the bottom. Most of the pipes have a signature of who made it. This was made in 1950. And the maker's long past. So, but this is the Starved Rock ceremonial pipe. It was gifted to me quite a few years ago. So we get to the National Pipe Museum and I see this gentleman walking out. And I mentioned I was a trapper before. This gentleman's walking out with a short white fur jacket on. And I go, hey, what's that jacket? Oh, this used to be my goat. I made a jacket out of him to honor him. And it's kind of odd that a guy would do that, but we're out in right by South Dakota, Minnesota border there. And things are a little wilder out there. So I get talking with the gentleman and he asked me, he goes, did you bring your hand drum? And I go, well, how did you know I had a hand drum? Because I was told you were coming. I didn't even know I was coming. And he goes, no, I was told by the creator, Mona, that you were coming and I'm supposed to teach you some songs. And I found out he was the medicine man for the Dakota tribe and he did the Sundance ceremonies. But he said what he did with the drum, you guys feel the vibration of the drum? That's the healing power of the hand drum. And he said he would go out and sing certain songs. And one of his most frequent calls was delivering babies. He would go to the expectant mothers and he would sing a certain song. And he would increase the heart rate of the mother and of the unborn child. And that would induce labor. He said he had a special song he sung for that. And after the baby was delivered, he would sing another song to welcome that baby into the world. He said he would go around and had songs for diabetes, had songs for gallbladder, different songs for different things. He would go around because the natives would ask him to do that. So he was quite the busy person. It was an interesting conversation. We spent 4 hours in that parking lot just talking. So I couldn't get enough talking with the guy. So he was talking about one of the things he said he was singing a song at Sundance the year before. He's singing the song and he's watching this woman dance around the backside. By the time he gets finished, she's standing next to him. She goes, oh, that was so beautiful. You sound like my husband that passed away. And he said he turned to her and he goes, well, he didn't know what he was doing either, huh? The humor transcends across all the tribes, so it was kind of interesting. You've seen the drum is one of the oldest native instruments. We'll go to this one here now. You guys recognize what this is? No, it's turtle shell. How many squares are in the middle here? How many? Well, there's 13. How many moons do we have a year?
13.
There's 13 moons every year. How many smaller squares are around the edge of the turtle shell? There's 28. 28 plus 1 makes a lunar month. Remember, we live on Turtle Island. That's why this is so sacred. And it's said that the turtle represents the mother because it has so many eggs. So that is one of the more sacred instruments that we have. The next instrument's an instrument of peace and love. So I'll see if I can play a little bit here. I'm not that good, believe me. So. They say it's an instrument of peace and love because you have to have both hands to play this. In my tribe, only the men are allowed to play the wooden flute. The women can play the metal flute, but the men, it's an interest, like I say, you have to have two hands to play this, so you can't have a hand on any weapons. So it's an instrument of peace and love. What happens a lot of times, a gentleman will grab his flute and he'll court the women. So remember, you women, if you hear a flute outside your window, you kind of get an idea what's going on. Now you got to go out and get a wooden flute. If you go up to the Black River Falls Casino, we have a monument right outside the casino about the Red Arrow Division. The Red Arrow Division was created in World War I for the 26 native Ho-Chunk people who went to war. Have you noticed there's two KIAs here? They came back, well, the Red Arrow Division, and we have an annual powwow called DORA, Descendants of the Red Arrow Division. This was here in World War I. We weren't even citizens of the United States, and we served in that conflict. June 2nd, 1924, Indian Citizenship Act. It had very little impact here in Illinois because all the natives were removed. My grandfather was one of the first natives brought back into Illinois in the 1935. So the Indian Citizenship Act was just a feel-good bill because they still took the kids for residential schools. We weren't allowed to practice our religion, our culture. So, and then in the 50s, we had the Indian Relocation Act. And a lot of that, if you did this here, you had to renounce your tribal citizenship. It was a way to try to break the tribes up. So, patriotism at a cost. They thought that the Native Americans were stealthier than they were. Well, the Native American groups, platoons, and the African American platoons were thought as expendable. So they were the first ones sent into the highest casualty rate areas. So they had the highest casualties of all the soldiers. We were one of the original code talkers. This is in World War I. The Germans deciphered every code that was made by the British, by the French, by the Americans. The only codes that they couldn't break were the Native American languages. There was like 26 different tribes that participate as code talkers. You guys probably see the romanticized version of the Navajo code talkers.
Yeah.
And that was in World War II. This was in World War I. Last year, Governor Evers in Wisconsin named the East and West Interstate System in Wisconsin Ho-Chunk Code Talker Highway. the US Mint came out with coins commemorating the Ho-Chunk code talkers. There's no code talkers left today, but we still remember who they were and what they did. So it was a big thing for our tribe. American Indians have proudly worn the uniform of every conflict the US has fought in. Currently, right now, we're 2% per capita of the United States, but we are the highest enlisting, what would you call it, minority. So we're the highest enlisting minority with the lowest, since we're only 2% of the population. Bill Clinton said it the best. It's a backdoor draft. These young people living on the reservations and settlements, there's nothing there. So in order to improve themselves, they go into the military and they learn different things, but they come back with some things too. So our society is not much different than yours. We have a little higher suicide rate because they go back to the reservation or the settlement and there's nothing there, and they get a little depressed. So we have our hero from the Ho-Chunk Nation, Mitchell Red Cloud Jr. He was a Marine and then he re-enlisted into the Army and he fought in the Korean conflict. He was mortally wounded and he had his fellow soldiers tie him to a tree and leave him a machine gun and some hand grenades. And he held off a battalion of charging Chinese long enough for his battalion to regroup and put up a counteroffensive. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. Today, in the Pacific Fleet, there's a troop carrier called the Mitchell Red Cloud. So he's still remembered. The powwow that we had on Veterans Day weekend, that was the Mitchell Red Cloud powwow and descendants of the Red Arrow Division powwow held at Camp Voke in Wisconsin. You probably know where Camp Voke is because that was an Air Force.
I don't really.
It's an Air Force Reserve base.
Okay.
So it was kind of neat going there because it was like you see in the movies. They put the mirror under your car. They walk, they walk around. You go through the whole thing. They take your license. They run you. It was interesting. It was you don't believe it till you see it. So American Indian Religious Freedom Act. If you look here, it says 1978. Well, growing up, we used to have Native American church at Starved Rock. And my mother always says, if anybody asks what all the cars are, just tell them we're having a meeting. Well, it's kind of, that is still code yet today for Native American church. I asked my cousin up in Wisconsin over the summer, I go, what you got going on this weekend? She goes, oh, we got a meeting Saturday night. And you didn't have to tell me what that was. That's code for Native American church. It's always been meeting. We always reference meeting. Well, they said the FBI would raid our Native American church, the early ones. So in order to stop the FBI from raiding the Native American church, this was even after 1978, they would raid the Native American church services. Well, they introduced the Bible to stop the FBI from raiding the Native American church, because we have special powers. So that's how they stopped the raiding the Native American church. Well, there's another sect of the Native American church. We really didn't gain total religious freedom until 1994, which wasn't that long ago, and it's the Peyote Lodge. The Peyote Lodge is this is a traditional Native American church service there. And then the Peyote Lodge is like this here. And then we have the Sweat Lodge. So you have 4 different things that we were, for our freedom of religion, we're free to practice any of them. Just like you white people have your freedom of religion where you're able to handle the snakes or drink the Kool-Aid. They told me not to say that one in Southern Illinois. I'm going to finish up with a Native American tale, and this is where that piece of wood's coming in. The crow was the most beautiful bird in the world. This is all at the time before the two-leggeds were on Turtle Island. The crow had all the colors of the rainbow. He had a crown that was almost fluorescent. He had a singing voice that was second to none. And one day the head crow gets up and he has counsel with all the fellow crows. Tell me your problems. And the next thing you know, the crows start talking. It says, I don't like living next to so-and-so, they're too loud. Well, we move you. I don't like living next to so-and-so because they're messy. You're gonna have to clean up. You know, I don't like living next to so-and-so because of this. I don't like living, you know, and all of this they could deal with at that council meeting. Well, one of the elder crows gets up, says, it is so dark out at night. Strange things rub against me. And then in the morning, some of my friends and relatives are gone. So the head crow goes, I am meeting with Mauna, the creator, in a couple weeks, and I will relay this message. A couple weeks goes by, the head crow meets with Mauna, the creator, and the creator goes, tell me your problems. And he goes, one of our elder crows got up and said, it's so dark out at night, strange things rub against him, and in the morning, some of his friends and relatives are gone. He goes, I know of this problem. Come back and see me in 100 years and I'll have a solution for you. Back then, time had no meaning. So 100 years flew by. So they get together in 100 years. Meanwhile, Mauna, the creator, went and seeded the countryside. They get together 100 years later. And he tells the head crow, I have a solution to your problem. Gather as much of the sacred wood that you can and take it up to the tallest hill that you have, and then light it on fire. And then the head crow, how will I know what the sacred wood is? It's from the tree that snows in the summertime. And the head crow really didn't know what he was talking about. It's from the tree that has the star in the wood. You guys know what that kind of wood I'm talking about? It's cottonwood. So that's the sacred wood. So the head crow, he's listening to Mauna and he's concentrating already on how he's going to do this. Well, Mauna says, be forewarned though, whatever you do, do not touch the sacred fire. And he notices the head crow is not paying any attention. So he booms it out louder. Be forewarned. There will be dire consequences for you and your people if you touch the sacred fire. You know what I mean by dire consequences? It's when you don't listen to your mom and dad. So they go ahead and they gather all this sacred wood. They spend 2 months gathering it all up. And they go ahead and start a fire. And after they start this fire, every time an ember would go up, a spirit would come down and take that ember up and put it in the sky. And this is how the stars were created in the sky and the moon. The spirits would come down. This happened for 3 days straight. After that, there was no more embers, and the ash field was smoldering on the 4th day. And it looked like it was just about out. The head crow goes back and he's checking on that. Well, the 5th day he goes back, it looks like it's out. I better not touch it. 6th day he goes back and looks at it again. Boy, it sure looks like it's out. I'd like to know. And curiosity's just eating him up inside. So now, 7th day goes by and he decides he's going to put his foot in the ash field. He finds out the fire is not out. And the fire flares up and he burns his foot. The next thing you know, he's dancing around on one foot, turns around, that fire catches his tail on fire and catches him on fire. He turns around and breathes in all the hot gases. Just then, there's a crash of lightning and thunder, and Mauna shows up. Mauna's not happy. I told you not to touch the sacred fire, for there will be dire consequences for you and your people. Look how you are today. You're burnt black. Look at your voice. Your voice. That's why the crow can only say, That's why the crow is black and how the stars came into the sky. So that's an old native Ho-Chunk tale. So. Yeah, that's it, so. Normally I would put all my future things on, but today's the last one for the next couple months, so. Any questions? I'm open for questions now, or we can take some pictures even.